This piece of history happened to be boring. History is usually not boring, but this was an exception. But why do we care? Why is it important to know about boring history? Well, boring history tells us a lot about how people lived in the past. It's part of the big picture, just like the exciting stuff. But sometimes it's hard to find the interesting parts in boring history. That's why we love stories like Cinderella or Hansel and Gretel. They're exciting and easy to understand. But those exciting stories aren't real. They're fairy tales. They're meant to entertain you, so it's important to learn about boring history. But it's also important to learn about exciting history. Well, we can't have history without the boring parts, because that's just the way it is. So let me tell you about some exciting history. Once upon a time, there was a great battle. It was called the Battle of Sabes. Now I know that doesn't sound very exciting, but trust me, this battle had everything. Cunning, betrayal, courage, greed, and death. You'll love it. Alright, it all started with a royal pig assassination. Okay, maybe not that exciting. Now let me rewind and start over. Alright, so there were two countries fighting over a piece of land. One country was ruled by King Louis, who was cool because he had a red beard and rode a white horse. The other country was ruled by King Andrew, who was also cool because he had a big army. Both kings wanted the same piece of land, which was mostly boring plains. But there was one really cool thing about these plains, a giant river that flowed through them. Whoever controlled the river would control the trade in the area and get super rich. So King Andrew's army was much bigger than King Louis's army, but King Louis was smarter. He knew that he couldn't beat King Andrew in a fair fight, so he made a plan. First, he sent a bunch of spies to watch King Andrew's army. Then he waited until King Andrew's army crossed the river and set up camp on the other side. Then he did something crazy. He led his army right into the middle of King Andrew's army and pretended to attack. King Andrew's army was huge, so King Louis knew that he couldn't beat them in a fair fight, so he made a plan. First, he pretended to attack King Andrew's army, but really he was just distracting them. While King Andrew's soldiers were focused on King Louis's fake attack, a few of King Louis's soldiers snuck over to the river and built a dam. They didn't want to flood King Andrew's camp, so they only made a small dam that would make the water level rise a little bit. Then, while King Andrew's army was still focused on King Louis's fake attack, a few of King Louis's soldiers snuck over to King Andrew's camp and let his cows and pigs out. The animals ran all over the camp, destroying everything in their path. By the time King Andrew's army realized what was happening, King Louis's soldiers were already on the other side of the river. King Andrew was furious, but he knew that he could end chase after King Louis because his army was too busy dealing with the cows and pigs, so he did the only thing he could do. He gritted his teeth and rebuilt his camp. Meanwhile, King Louis was having a party, celebrated his victory with wine and cheese and roasted suckling pig. He didn't care that King Andrew was rebuilding his camp. He was too busy partying. But King Andrew wasn't the kind of guy who took insults lying down. He spent months rebuilding his army, and when he was ready to go to war again, he did something even crazier than letting his cows and pigs loose. He hired mercenaries. Mercenaries are basically just professional soldiers who fight for money. King Andrew hired a group of elite mercenaries called the Gentlemen Volunteers. They were scary dudes with scary beards who fought with swords and shields. King Andrew paid them a lot of money to help him beat King Louis, and when King Andrew's army was ready, he attacked King Louis again. Once again, King Louis knew that he couldn't win a fair fight, so he made another plan. Pretended to run away, but really he was hiding with his friend, Queen Isabella. Queen Isabella was the smartest queen in the kingdom. She'd been secretly spying on King Andrew and knew his biggest weakness. She also knew that he liked to party, so she invited him over for a little get-together. King Andrew was suspicious, but he couldn't resist the chance to spy on his enemy, so he went to the party. And when he arrived, he saw all of King Louis's top advisors and generals. He was furious, but he had to do something. He was outnumbered. He tried to arrest King Louis, but King Louis escaped. When King Andrew turned to leave, he tripped over a rug and fell face first into a bowl of punch. The partygoers laughed, and King Andrew was so embarrassed that he ran away. When King Andrew returned to his army, he told his soldiers that King Louis had betrayed him. He said that King Louis had tricked him into coming to the party, and that he had only pretended to be friendly. King Andrew's soldiers were furious, and they wanted revenge. But before they could do anything, King Andrew got a letter from King Louis. In the letter, King Louis offered to end the war and split the land between them. King Andrew was tempted, but he couldn't admit defeat, so he wrote back saying no. King Louis sighed. He didn't want to go to war, but he knew that King Andrew wouldn't accept peace, so he got ready to fight. The next morning, King Andrew's soldiers woke up to the sound of drums. They looked across the river and saw King Louis's army getting ready to cross. They were scared because they knew that they couldn't win a fair fight, but King Andrew told them not to worry. He said that he had a plan. When King Louis's soldiers crossed the river, King Andrew's soldiers ambushed them. They captured King Louis and brought him back to their camp. King Louis was furious. He yelled at King Andrew for breaking the rules of war, but King Andrew didn't care. He was going to win the war, whether by fighting or by trickery. The next morning, King Andrew woke up to the sound of drums. He looked across the river and saw King Louis's army getting ready to cross. He knew that he had to do something, so he got dressed and grabbed his sword. He led his army to the river and prepared to fight. But before they could do anything, King Louis surrendered. He gave up the fight and agreed to split the land with King Andrew. And that's exactly what they did. They split the land, and everyone lived happily ever after. The end? Was that exciting enough for you? Of course it was. Tell me what you remember about the story. You'll probably remember the beginning, the part where I was talking about King Louis and King Andrew and their armies and the Battle of Sabes. That's the exciting part, but what about the boring part? Can you remember what the boring part was? Well, the boring part was when I was talking about King Louis and King Andrew signing a peace treaty and splitting the land. That's the boring part, but it's important too. See, history isn't just about the exciting stuff, it's about the boring stuff too. It's because history helps us understand the world we live in today. And if we don't understand the boring parts of history, we won't understand the world we live in today. For example, imagine you're watching a movie and the hero and the villain are fighting. It's super exciting. But then the movie cuts to a scene where the hero and the villain are signing a peace treaty. You might get bored, but that scene is important too. Without that scene, you wouldn't understand why the hero and the villain aren't fighting anymore. It's the same thing happens with history. Sometimes we get excited when we learn about wars and battles, but we also need to learn about the treaties and agreements that end those wars. Otherwise, we won't understand the world we live in today. Let me give you another example. Imagine you're playing a video game and the good guys and the bad guys are fighting. It's super exciting. Then the game cuts to a scene where the good guys and the bad guys are signing a peace treaty. You might get bored, but that scene is important too. Without that scene, you wouldn't understand why the good guys and the bad guys aren't fighting anymore. The same thing happens with history. Sometimes we get excited when we learn about wars and battles, but we also need to learn about the treaties and agreements that end those wars. Otherwise, we won't understand the world we live in today. For example, the Battle of Sabes was an important battle because it helped shape the future of Europe. But the peace treaty that ended the battle was also important. It helped shape the future of Europe too. Without understanding both the battle and the treaty, we won't understand the world we live in today. So next time you're learning about history, remember that the exciting parts are important, but so are the boring parts. By understanding all of history, we can better understand the world we live in today.